City Center Radio. It is episode 277, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, July 19th, 2024. Hello to all you saints and sinners out there. I hope you are having a great week and are on the cusp of an amazing weekend. If you need plans, go to holycitycenter.com/calendar, and you'll be able to see what is going on around town, not just this weekend, but into next week, next month, and beyond. It is Charleston's best events calendar, if I do say so myself, and I just did. So go check it out and see what is happening around town. I've been enjoying time with my family. We've gone out to eat to a couple places. Martin's Barbecue, which is always a favorite of ours on James Island. Enjoyed lots of tasty food there. And as if that wasn't enough, we got some more barbecue. We've also went to Rodney Scott's Barbecue, which I haven't been to in a while. So it was a nice opportunity to, go downtown and visit the restaurant. Like I said, just haven't been there in a bit. As always, the food was awesome, and it's been a little hot out there, and my parents have their dogs with them, so we like to go places that have patios, and, thankfully the places we've gone to have a little bit of shade, but still a little toasty out there, but we are doing as best as we can in the heat and enjoying each other's company. And it's been nice having them here. My brother and his family, my niece and nephew, they've been enjoying all sorts of swimming, whether it's the pool in my complex or the beach. They've gone to water parks. I mean, they've done everything in the handful of days they've been here, just enjoying their time. So it's nice seeing them and also seeing them having fun. So been great. But other than that, not a whole lot to report on. So let's get into the latest news. We have some updates on the sweet Grass Vodka situation. Unfortunately, part of it is very sad, tragic news, but we'll talk about that actually first. So you may remember, outside of all the drama with the business itself, there was an incident where Jared Swanger, who is the owner of Sweetgrass Vodka and has been facing all sorts of accusations regarding the finances and possibly misleading investors and not paying them back and things like that. But he and his wife were dealing with a situation where their child had fallen into the family pool at their house, and there wasn't a whole lot of information about that situation the last time I talked about Sweetgrass Vodka and the Swangers. And unfortunately, I have to pass along the information that the child did die. So just a horrific and horrible tragedy that no one should have to deal with. So while they're dealing with this, horrible situation, which I can't even imagine, they're also having to deal with the fallout of everything that's going on with the business, which of course cannot be easy and is just perhaps muddying the waters even more, because of course they're not, I'm sure their priorities are not answering questions from the media or really anything outside of just mourning this, horrible tragedy. So while they're dealing with that situation, there were some more reports about what Jared Swanger was saying behind the scenes. So apparently he's been trying to convince investors that he had a plan to save, his business, which is now shuttered. Specifically, the Post and Courier reported that starting on June 30th, Swanger was sending text messages to his investors, telling them not to worry about anything that's been going on. Don't worry about these media reports. A new CEO would be coming on board during his quote unquote absence. So the absence, the Post and Courier speculated, and I would agree with this speculation, it's likely a reference to that tragic passing of his 13-month-old son, who died the day before the texts were sent out. So that was on June 29th. So just the next day, he's, talking about an absence. It would make sense that that's what he's referencing. So a couple things there, of course. Number one is that apparently he's saying, hey, there's someone who's going to take over and right this ship. Everything's going to be okay. And also he's still involved in the business. He's just taking a little bit of a leave considering what happened. That June 30th text message that was shared with the Post and Courier by several investors, not just one, several of them shared it with the Post and Courier. That message apparently said that two men that were formerly associated with the company were going to be stepping in during however long this absence is going to be, and that Swanger says that they'd be reaching out to investors this week. That was back again on June 30th. Well, the two men that were mentioned in that text, they spoke to the Post and Courier. They asked not to be named because they have served Swanger with cease and desist letters over the last couple months. And in those cease and desist letters, they've asked him to stop using their names in association with the company because they say they are no longer part of it. So whoever these people are that he is saying we're going to take over are telling him to stop saying that because they're not involved in the business and they are not taking over whatsoever. So not only did they tell the Post and Courier that they're not taking over Sweetgrass Vodka or any of Swanger's debts that he currently has, they said they have not even had any conversations with Swanger about it. So it's not even been discussed. So it's not like a miscommunication where I thought we had a deal. Like no, we haven't even spoke to this guy. So just. Is it a straight up lie? I mean, it certainly seems to be, but I can't say that without knowing for sure. Could be a miscommunication, misunderstanding of some kind. It's a pretty big miscommunication or misunderstanding. But again, considering what had happened the day before he sent these texts and, how tragic that is, it's hard to know motivations and to get in someone's headspace and know if they, something that if all things were normal in their life may not have been a miscommunication if that's indeed what it is. But obviously, things are very much not under control in regards to this business. So if the business were to move forward, the Post and Courier was reporting that Swanger would need to make whole more than 20 investors and creditors in both the United States and Canada. So there's a lot of people who are owed money, and he would have to first take care of that before really moving forward at all. And it's unclear if there's any chance that will happen. Now, the house that he owned in Mount Pleasant that had the pool that his child was found in before being brought to the hospital, they recently sold that house back on June 21st for $1.7 million. Now, some of that money was able to go towards what he owes, but it's not anywhere near the amount of money overall. It just chipped away at a little bit of it. So that took care of some of the issues, but there's still plenty to go. So still more questions and answers, more confusion regarding what is going on with this business. But it certainly seems like there are no solutions on the horizon. There's no plan, it appears, because the one that he was saying to people, hey, we got these two guys that are going to take over, they both have denied that they're going to do that and haven't even spoken to him about it. So, again, more questions and answers, and it certainly seems like we will not be hearing about this business in the future in terms of being open for business. I'm sure we're going to continue to hear about lawsuits and issues, but I would not bank on this company coming back based on what I've been reading and what's being reported. So both of the men that were arrested for fatally running over two 20-year-olds along a downtown Charleston road allegedly were drinking at bars before they hit the women with their vehicles just 30 minutes apart back a couple months ago. You probably remember this tragedy that happened, and then the ensuing days where we find out there's an arrest for someone for hit and run. And then all of a sudden there's another person. So two separate people hit these women on the same night. And we'll break down the timeline that came out. The details about them drinking at bars came from an investigator who testified on July 17th. They said that Seth Carlson, who is 33 years old, allegedly drank several alcoholic beverages at, stop me if you heard this before, the Sweetgrass Vodka Lounge. Yes, they're part of this story too. So apparently Carlson drank several beverages there while he was performing in a band during a private event that night. He is then accused of running over Ariana Gamber and Lizzie Zito while those two were walking alongside Morrison Drive near the entrance to the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge. They allegedly were hit around 1:12 a.m. on April 28th. So that investigator who's with the Charleston police, his name is Jose Bordalo. He laid out what police say happened to those two 20-year-old friends that night. And he did this, as I mentioned, he was testifying on July 17th during a preliminary hearing in magistrate court for both Carlson and the other gentleman, Max Gentilin, who is 25 years old. So they broke down the timeline. Video footage shows Carlson struck the women with his car and then continued driving without stopping until he crashed his truck in a ditch over in West Ashley just 10 minutes later. At that West Ashley crash scene, a woman who reported seeing him driving erratically went to the truck to check on him. She reported that he smelled of alcohol and was sweating. She also claimed that Carlson was, quote, 3 sheets to the wind, end quote. Now, going back to Morrison Drive at 1:43 a.m., so about 20 minutes after the women were first hit by Carlson, video shows that Gentilin's car hopped the curb and ran over those same women again. Gentilin had been drinking alcoholic beverages, which apparently he was holding in both hands at a bar that night. This, again, is according to the investigator when he was testifying at this hearing. However, for whatever reason, he did not say what bar Gentilin came from, whereas he mentioned where Carlson came from. Not sure why that is, but so we don't know where Gentilin was drinking. However, one of Gentilin's friends did tell investigators that they went to several different establishments that night, all of which serve alcohol. And in addition to that, empty beer bottles were found in Gentilin's car, when they went to investigate. Now, the bodies of Gamber and Zito were laying in thick brush for 7 hours after they were hit twice, before they were finally discovered by someone who had been walking in that area in the morning. Now, neither man, as I mentioned, was arrested until days later, and although the investigators said they were drinking, they are not expected to face drunken driving charges. Because, of course, if either man had alcohol in his system the night of the crash, blood alcohol tests are not going to reveal that days later when they were finally arrested. So although you may be able to assume that they were probably driving under the influence, obviously, if they were drinking, they're under some form, they're under the influence in some capacity, but specifically over the legal amount, I think would be a safe assumption, but there's no way to prove that. So it's not expected that among the charges that they will be facing, nothing involving drunk driving will be part of it. Now, the attorneys for each of those men argued that the Charleston police have yet to provide evidence that their client's collision actually resulted in the deaths of Gamber and Zito. Now, it's clear that being hit by one of those cars is ultimately what killed the two women. But they're arguing, well, we don't know if the first person who hit them killed them or the second person. Now, despite that, the judge disagreed with them, and she ruled that Carlson will remain charged with 2 counts of hit and run with death and 2 counts of reckless homicide, while Gentilin's 2 counts of hit and run with death will also stand. Both defendants posted bond and were released from jail back in May, so they are out of jail currently. So we'll see what happens. As I said, it's unlikely that any drunken driving charges will be added to either of these gentlemen's court cases, and I'm sure we'll have more evidence that's presented at the actual trials themselves. Still a little ways to go, of course. This was just a preliminary hearing, but the cases against both men are moving forward, and both of them are being charged with hit and run charges that include death. So although police haven't said specifically when the women died, if it was the first accident, the second, if it was a combination, they haven't, but regardless, they're moving forward with those charges, and I'll keep you posted on anything that happens. Staying in the world of trials and crimes, convicted murderer and fraudster Alex Murdaugh is challenging the 40-year sentence he received for financial fraud. He received that back in April from a federal judge, and he is challenging it, obviously he and his attorneys, and they are calling it cruel and unusual punishment. So in a brief that was filed last week with the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, Murdaugh's attorneys wrote that the 40-year financial fraud sentence that was handed down by U.S. Judge Richard Gergel back in April is, quote, grossly disproportionate compared to other similar financial crime sentences, end quote. So Murdaugh is seeking to vacate that 40-year sentence and wants a new sentencing hearing presided over by a new judge, preferably one from outside South Carolina. This is all according to the brief that was filed. So part of the argument is that Murdaugh was 55 years old when he was sentenced, and a 40-year sentence is effectively a death sentence. This is what Murdaugh's lawyers are saying. And so giving someone a death sentence for financial crimes, they're saying, is cruel and unusual. They're saying this is way too much time for these crimes. Well, if he committed these crimes when he was 20 years old and got a 40-year sentence, then it wouldn't have been a quote unquote death sentence. So, does your age matter when it comes to these things? Well, we'll see what happens. I don't think he'll find much sympathy from really anyone out there, but that doesn't mean legally a judge won't agree that perhaps that was, even though we're talking about crimes where he bilked people out of over, I think it was like over $8 million in total. Despite that, they may decide, 40 years is too much. So we'll see what happens there. So far, no decision has been made, but I'll be sure to keep you updated. You may remember on a previous podcast, I talked about Crime Stoppers of the Lowcountry and how that organization was dissolving after 44 years of helping solve crimes here in South Carolina. Now, despite the fact that happened, although there are a couple branches in certain counties that are still open for a little bit, but they are all going to close here this year. Now, despite that, there is a chance that some small local chapters will take over and kind of fill the gap that'll be left by this organization ending their services. And this is all according to Helen Westmoreland, who is currently with Crime Stoppers of Oconee County. So if you don't remember, part of the reason why Crime Stoppers of the Lowcountry decided to dissolve was that they didn't really have consistent board membership in the Lowcountry area that covered 11 counties, so they weren't really having enough people leading it. The South Carolina Crime Stoppers Council stepped in to try and get smaller programs started instead of this kind of overarching, organization that was probably overseeing too many counties. So they were trying to get that done. It just didn't happen at the time. But Crime Stopper leaders are saying that many of those smaller organizations are still in the process of getting off the ground. So although it didn't get done perhaps when they wanted it to, there are still some smaller programs that are working towards opening and providing those same types of services. Specifically, local agencies, according to Westmoreland, are currently looking for volunteers to help lead those small chapters. So it seems they're not too far off from perhaps being able to get these off the ground. So any member of the community who is interested in starting a program in their area or being part of the new boards that are already in the process of being established can contact the state coordinator at an email that I will give you. So if you're interested, you're going to want to email coordinator at 888, use the actual number 8, crimesc.com. So again, that's coordinator at 888crimesc.com. Some state legislators here in South Carolina are hoping that the Palmetto State will follow in the footsteps of Louisiana, whose governor recently signed a bill making it the first state in the nation requiring public school classrooms to display the 10 Commandments. That's right. Back in June, just a month ago, that law was signed, as I said, by the governor of Louisiana. And yes, people here in South Carolina, specifically legislators, want that same thing to happen here, because of course they do. I have no problem with the 10 Commandments. I have no problem with religion. I have a problem with it being in schools. That's kind of a big deal in America. We're not supposed to be combining church and state like that. So regardless if you yourself are Christian or believe in the 10 Commandments or what have you, the schools, public schools, are not the place for that. Now, the passage of a law like that here in South Carolina is nowhere near a done deal, besides the fact it hasn't been introduced. But the constitutionality of this measure in Louisiana is already being challenged in federal court. And previously, the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld the position that this is unconstitutional to require schools to have 10 commandments in the classrooms. Most recently, they upheld that position in 1980 after Kentucky tried to pass a law requiring schools to post the 10 commandments. So now I say that, but we've also seen that this current makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't really care much about past rulings and decades-long precedents that have been set. They don't care about that, as we've seen with multiple rulings. So although it may seem like a done deal that this is going to be ruled unconstitutional, and in which case South Carolina won't attempt to pass a similar piece of legislation, there is absolutely no guarantee. So we're going to have to wait and see what actually happens here. So, as I mentioned, the Louisiana law has been challenged. There's really no update outside of that. Civil liberties groups have filed a lawsuit against that state. They did so almost immediately, and they're arguing that the law violates the clause of the First Amendment that prohibits the government from establishing religion. So that's where it stands right now. We'll see when and if the U.S. Supreme Court takes it up. They could always punt it back down to a lower court. So we'll see what ends up happening. But again, neither you would think that this would be a done deal based on history. But again, we've seen that the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't necessarily care so much about that. So we'll see what ends up happening. And lastly, this was kind of a bizarre story, and I just wanted to share it. This was posted originally by the state newspaper, and it has to do with animal bites and attacks here in South Carolina. And it kind of, to me, was interesting because we've had a weird run of random animals on the loose. You, of course, remember the monkey that was loose. I think it was in Walterboro. And then, what was it, a week ago, there was an emu, not an emo, an emu that had broken out of, a farm or whatever and was on the loose. So I think this is why the story ended up coming up. But in any event, 10 people, 10 people reported that they or an animal, so like a pet, a dog, a cat or whatever, were bitten or scratched by monkeys in South Carolina in 2023. That's right. Last year, 10 people reported that they or an animal were bitten or scratched by a monkey. That's a higher number than I would have thought. I would have thought the number would have been 0 or perhaps 1, but no, 10. But that was not the highest number at all, not even close to being the highest number. But they were the only ones listed in the exotic animal category, according to a report from the Department of Public Health that was compiled for the state newspaper. So they requested that this be compiled. And again, the only exotic animal was a monkey. But there are other animals, of course, and this shouldn't be a surprise, that the animal with the most bites reported in South Carolina last year were dogs. No surprise there. There's a lot more dogs, whether stray or have been adopted. There's going to be a lot more than those. Specifically, there was 10,763 reports of dog bites. And next after them was 3,288 bites from cats. So no surprise there. But outside of the run-of-the-mill pets that we're used to, there was a couple other kind of interesting ones. So in addition to the monkey bites and attacks that I mentioned, there was a single donkey and 27 horses that bit someone, according to the report. In the wild animal category, bats were the largest culprit, with 572 bites, with raccoons coming up next at 253. Surprisingly, rodents accounted for just 175 bites, despite the fact you would think, well, there's more of a chance of a rodent being in a house or a business versus a bat or a raccoon. But no, they're pretty far down on the list. Meanwhile, the list also included squirrels with 71 bites. This is specific to rodents. Of that 175, squirrels were 71, rats were 46, mice 20, and rabbits at 10. Also in the wild animal category were coyotes, who had 14 bites, which is kind of surprising, and bobcats, who were responsible for 2. So again, I think this was just kind of put out because of specifically that monkey that was on the loose. And so I think the state newspaper was like, I wonder how often people are attacked or bitten or whatever by an animal like a monkey and how that compares to others. So I read the piece. I thought it was interesting, and now you know it as well. So if you, like I said, 10's not a big number, but the fact that 10 people in a year in this state alone were bitten or scratched by a monkey was a little surprising. But I guess in this state, I shouldn't be surprised by anything at this point. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Big thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And also a big thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. Enjoy your weekend. If you need plans, holycitycenter.com/calendar has you covered. We'll talk to you all again on Monday. Until then, good night and good luck.